Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire deal after what has been weeks of intense negotiations. The first phase is expected to go into effect Sunday and will last 6 weeks. It calls for Hamas to release 33 hostages, and in exchange, Israel is expected to potentially release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. The Israeli military won't completely withdraw from Gaza until all hostages are returned. But a buffer zone is expected to be established between Gaza and southern Israel. The war began October 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel, killing about 1,200 people and kidnapping 251 others. 117 Israeli hostages have since been returned alive. About 100 others are still being held in captivity in the Gaza Strip. But the Israeli military warns that it believes about a third of those hostages are dead. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry, meantime, says more than 46,000 Palestinians have been killed since Israel began launching retaliatory strikes more than a year ago. Now, most of Gaza's population has been displaced and is facing extreme hunger as humanitarian groups struggle to deliver aid. On Wednesday, President Biden praised the U.S., Israel, and the incoming Trump team for working together to secure this deal.
And we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States. This deal was developed and negotiated under my administration, but its terms will be implemented, for the most part, by the next administration. In these past few days, we've been speaking as one team.
CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio brings us the latest from Tel Aviv. Ramy?
Yes, this is an historic breakthrough after 15 bloody months of war, and we could start seeing Hamas release Israeli hostages as soon as this Sunday. Here in Israel, the news is being welcomed with relief, with joy from hostage family groups, but also anxiety about the condition of their loved ones. What kind of person will they reunite with physically and psychologically? There's also the fear that this deal could collapse because it requires good faith, trust between sworn enemies, and it involves politics. It involves egos, different religions and cultures. But getting to the mechanics of this deal very quickly, it's made up of 3 phases. Phase 1 would take effect this Sunday and would last 42 days, 6 weeks. And Hamas would then release 33 hostages, including women, the elderly, and the sick over that whole entire time frame in drips and drabs. In exchange, Israel would set free dozens of Palestinian detainees for each of those hostages. Israel would also pull back to Gaza's perimeters, away from the population centers, and then humanitarian aid would be surged in. And that is something Gazans have very much been desperate and really dying for. The health ministry run by Hamas says nearly 47,000 Gazans have died in the past 466 days. In later phases of this deal, Hamas would release the remaining hostages, both alive as well as dead, and then there would be talk about reconstruction and talk about the issue of governance of Gaza. But I'll add that this long timeline also sets up the possibility for failure. Looking ahead, it will be up to a president, Donald Trump, to try to make sure that that does not happen. But for now, as I said, relief from so many that a ceasefire and hostage deal, elusive for so long, has finally been clinched. Back to you.
Ramy Inocencio in Tel Aviv. Thank you, Ramy. O Shay joins us now with more on all of this. He's a retired Navy SEAL who served as the coordinator of the State Department's hostage working group in Iraq, I understand, between 2004 and 2006. Dan, great to have you with us, and I want to get your sense, based on your experience in knowing how challenging securing this type of agreement is, on what you make of the terms, the phases, and the delicacy of what comes next.
Well, we've been here once before in the early phase of the war when there was that initial ceasefire and there was an initial release. I thought that created a blueprint for the future. Sadly, another 500 days or so since this conflict started, and now we're finally seeing a transition. And in large part, that is as much as what has happened in the last year with the Hezbollah, Hamas largely being wiped out, Hezbollah leadership being taken out, and now we have a new incoming president. So they've been at the table for months in Qatar to do this. And now we're seeing very reminiscent of when Ronald Reagan came in, the same type of transition between Carter and Reagan, and now between Biden and Trump. So I think that's a lot of factors came into this. And I think that's why we were finally able to see this deal come into place at the 11th hour, really, of the Biden presidency.
It's interesting. You're the second, expert to make that comparison between the Reagan-Carter administrations now and the Biden-Trump handoff. It is complex. It is delicate. What do you make then of what it took to get it done now? Like, what was the difference maker?
Well, as I said, Hamas, Hezbollah's leadership was wiped out. I just saw a report earlier today that although 20, 30,000 fighters have been killed reportedly by the IDF, they've recruited the same number. So Hamas has restocked its battalions, if you will, if that report is correct. So it doesn't mean the end of the conflict. And, this 42 days will be touch and go. Last hostage exchange, there were roughly 101 left being held. I've heard numbers in that most of them have been maybe gone. And so who will be released by Hamas will play out. And I'm hearing that it's only going to be women, men over 50. They will hold on to the military age-mailed Israelis. And the exchange is roughly 30 Palestinians will be exchanged for one Israeli. So the devil's in the details. A lot will pan out. And this ceasefire could collapse at any moment. The conflict it's taken a ceasefire. The war has not ended.
What can you tell us about these Palestinian prisoners that Israel is agreeing to release?
Well, I haven't seen specifics because obviously the Israelis would want to say the same. You're holding on to our military age male hostages. Why would we be releasing military age male Palestinians who could get right back in the fight? So again, I'm not privy to the list of those Palestinians, but arguably, if 33 odd hostages are going to be released, times 30, that's the number of potential Palestinians. So we're talking the Palestinian release numbers could be in the hundreds, if not more. And the issue will be, will they release Palestinian or PLO or Fatah or Hamas or Islamic Jihad leadership to get right back into the fight? That remains to be seen over the coming weeks.
Dan O Shay, great to get your insight and some of your key questions as we watch this unfold, joining us from Florida. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now, news of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, it spread quickly throughout Washington, which is already experiencing a busy day for lawmakers. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for example, announced the agreement during a confirmation hearing for President-elect Trump's Secretary of State nominee, Marco Rubio. Texas Senator John Cornyn also weighed in with reporters.
For the edification of the committee, I've just been advised that there's been a ceasefire announced in Gaza. Before we all celebrate, though, obviously we're all going to want to see how that executes.
I don't believe in coincidences. And so I do believe President Trump had an impact on this deal. And obviously the Biden administration was eager to wrap this up before they leave office.
We're also following reaction from West Palm Beach, Florida and Washington. You're looking at CBS News political reporter Aaron Navarro covering President-elect Donald Trump on the left, and CBS News digital White House and politics reporter Kathryn Watson with more on response from President Biden on the right. Aaron, let's start with you. President-elect Trump is claiming responsibility. What else are you hearing from the Trump team?
Well, starting actually with what we're hearing from Israel, where Prime Minister Netanyahu's office said that the Prime Minister and President-elect Trump actually spoke this afternoon and set a potential plan to meet in Washington, D.C. Netanyahu, in the readout from the Prime Minister's office, thanked Trump for his promotion, particularly when it comes to releasing the kidnapped hostages. We have reached out to Trump's team for any readout or comment from their end of things. From what we've heard from Trump, he was, quote, thrilled about the hostage deal part of this ceasefire deal. You remember last week, Trump said, quote, all hell will break loose if Israeli hostages in Gaza aren't released by his inauguration. He seems to be pleased with that, while also taking credit, saying that this deal in general would not have happened had he not been elected this past November. We've also heard from his pick for National Security Advisor, Congressman Mike Waltz, who reacted by saying that there was a, quote, Trump effect that helped get this deal done.
We know that Steve Witkoff was Trump's envoy to help negotiate this deal. Help us better understand how his team was involved in these talks.
Yeah, Steve Witkoff, a prominent real estate investor here in America, had been Trump's pick to be special envoy for the Middle East. At this point, we know that he had been working with one of President Biden's Middle East advisors, Brett McGurk, in getting this deal done. Sources also told CBS News that Witkoff in particular had pressured Netanyahu and Israel to accept the contours of this deal. But, you saw President Biden saying that his team, President-elect Trump's transition team, spoke with one voice, and it was really a kind of historic collaboration that ended up getting this deal done. Of course, what's next is on Trump's docket as president, and especially implementing the 6-week phase of this ceasefire deal and eventually, hopefully, a permanent ceasefire in phase 2.
And we're just showing a message of the president-elect saying, imagine what more we can do once in office. We saw Senator Marco Rubio's confirmation hearing as well earlier. He's expected to be Trump's Secretary of State. What are the long-term plans for the Trump team in promoting peace in the Middle East?
Yeah, both Rubio and Trump signaled today that they see this deal as a sort of building block to further peace in the Middle East. In Trump's reaction, he said that he would use this momentum, he says, from the deal to expand on the Abraham Accords. That was the agreement between Israel and 2 Gulf countries, including the United Arab Emirates and Israel. And Trump really points to that as a sign of his foreign policy working. So he's looking to do more of that when he actually takes office.
Aaron Navarro joining us from West Palm Beach tonight. Aaron, thanks so much. Let's cross over now to CBS News Digital, White House and politics reporter Kathryn Watson. So we heard there Trump taking responsibility, but we also heard today current President Biden say this agreement is exactly the agreement he laid out in 2024. Help us understand how Biden helped shape this.
Sure. So, yeah, more or less, the outlines the contours of the agreement that we learned about today, that was announced today, were basically what President Biden proposed way back in May. There have been months and months and months of negotiations by President Biden's team. I think Secretary Antony Blinken probably has gotten quite a lot of jet lag through these many months of negotiations, along with many of the top Biden administration officials who have been working these deals. So yes, it is more or less what President Biden had proposed as far as the timeline, as far as these 3 stages that the president had formerly suggested. But yes, as was mentioned earlier, President-elect Trump is taking credit for some of this, while of course President Biden and his team have been working on this. And as President Biden was very clear today, in the last couple of months, this has been something that they have brought the Trump team onto. As was mentioned previously, Steve Witkoff has been increasingly involved in these negotiations. The Biden team really wants to make sure that this is a smooth transition when it comes to this agreement. They don't want there to be any hiccups. That's why they were working so closely with the Trump team in what is a very delicate situation.
That's what jumped out to me about Biden's remarks today. He not only took credit for shaping it, but acknowledged it will be up to Team Trump and the president-elect to accomplish and implement this plan. Tell us about why that was so important for him today, especially ahead of his farewell speech.
Absolutely. Well, something that has been a couple of things here. Something that has been really important to President Biden is having this smooth transition of power, despite the obvious and many very disagreements that he has with the incoming administration. That was really important to the current president, that this be negotiated with the next president's team. Another thing that I think is really critical is we have seen in the past the former president, soon to be president again, Mr. Trump, kind of undermine or, for lack of a better term, sometimes just do away with previous deals that have been negotiated by previous administrations. That's not entirely unique to Mr. Trump. This is something that has happened in transitions past. So the team Biden really wanted to make sure that there weren't any hiccups as far as that goes. Something else that is really important is we're talking about not necessarily just 2 U.S. administrations, but the United States front as a whole. And it's really important to not only the negotiating partners, but really the world to see that the U.S. is united on this. And of course, it is really important for the integrity of this deal that the Trump team also be involved. President Biden wanted to make clear that that Hamas and others in the region couldn't just wait it out until indefinitely to see if Team Trump was willing to have a deal that was more in their favor. So they really wanted to get it done, and seemingly they did.
Really underscoring how important it is to both parties to have this be successful. Kathryn Watson, great to chat with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.